Story 1. This story was sent by a viewer, and it happened some time ago. Claire had always dreamed of living somewhere quiet. The noise of the city had worn her down over the years, the constant hum of traffic, the never-ending clamor of people. So, when the chance came to move into a secluded house on the outskirts of town, she seized it without hesitation. A small, old house with a view of the woods, just the solitude she needed to escape her hectic life. The house was exactly as she had imagined. Tall windows that allowed sunlight to filter through the rooms, wooden floors that creaked with every step, and the kind of charm you only found in old, forgotten places. The kind of place where you could almost feel the past lingering in the air. She moved in alone, leaving behind everything that had tied her to her old life. She needed a fresh start. The house felt like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with new memories. But there was something off about it. It wasn't the house itself. No, the house was perfect in its own peculiar way, quiet, empty, and full of promise. It was the silence that unnerved Claire. At first, it felt peaceful. The quiet was what she craved for so long. But as the days wore on, that silence became oppressive. It wasn't long before she began to hear things. The first night, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. A soft creak from somewhere deep in the house. The floorboards, she thought. Old houses like this did that. They settled. She brushed it off, buried herself under the thick comforter, and went to sleep. But the next night, the sounds were louder. It wasn't just a creak this time. It was a knock, a single, hollow sound against the window. Claire froze. She turned her head, her heart suddenly racing. The wind? The trees? She forced herself to breathe slowly. It had to be one of those things. Still, she couldn't shake the unease that crept up her spine. She lay there, staring into the dark, listening as the seconds ticked by. The night was still again. But then, it came again, the knock. This time, it was louder, almost as if something, or someone, was trying to get in. Claire sat up in bed, her breathing shallow, heart pounding. She slowly turned her head toward the window. It was pitch black outside, nothing but the sway of the trees in the wind. Nothing was there. She stood up, half tempted to go to the window and check. But something kept her still. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a strange sense of expectation. She couldn't explain it. She had no idea what she was waiting for. But she knew she wasn't alone. The next day, she inspected the house. Every window, every door, every crevice. There was no sign of anything out of the ordinary. Still, the nagging feeling stayed with her. That evening, she made sure to double-check the windows, locking them with a sense of finality. She'd lived in old houses before. They made noises. It was just the house settling. Nothing more. She went to bed early that night, determined to get some rest. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept wandering back to the sounds, the knocking, the feeling of being watched. Just when she thought she might finally drift off, she heard it again, a soft scratching, like fingernails on glass. Claire's heart skipped a beat. This time, it wasn't just a knock. This time, it was something else. Something deliberate. She sat up quickly, eyes wide, scanning the room. Her breath hitched when she saw it. A shadow in the doorway. A tall figure, standing perfectly still, its outline just visible in the dim moonlight. Claire's body tensed. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Was it just the shadows playing tricks on her? Was it a reflection? A trick of the light? But no. The figure was too real. It was too solid, too distinct. She could make out the outline of a person, tall, unnervingly tall, with an elongated shape. It stood in the doorway, unmoving, staring at her. The room was dead silent. She could hear her own heart beating in her ears. "Hello?" Claire whispered, her voice barely a breath. No response. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there. Claire slowly slid out of bed, her body stiff, trying not to make a sound. She reached for the light switch, but her hand trembled. She didn't dare turn her eyes away from the doorway, fearing that if she did, the figure might disappear, or worse, come closer. With a rush of adrenaline, Claire bolted out of the room, her feet slapping the hardwood floor as she dashed down the hallway. She reached the staircase and glanced back. The shadow was gone. The house was silent. Claire spent the rest of the night in a daze, pacing back and forth in the living room. There was no logical explanation for what she'd seen. It couldn't have been real. But the fear in her chest told her otherwise. The next day, she spent hours researching the house's history. She needed to know what had happened here. Who had lived here before her? What had happened to them? That's when she found it, a name. David Turner. David Turner had rented the house for years. He'd been a quiet man, a loner, someone who kept to himself. And then, one day, he simply vanished. No one knew what had happened to him. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. He had just disappeared. Claire's blood ran cold. The man in the doorway, the one who had been watching her as she slept, looked exactly like the description of David Turner. But that wasn't possible, was it? David Turner had disappeared over a decade ago. There was no way he could still be in the house. But something about the article, the eerie coincidence, made her doubt the rational explanations. She felt her hand shaking as she placed the newspaper down. Was David Turner still here? Was he the one who had been watching her? Claire didn't want to believe it, but the growing sense of dread in her gut told her otherwise. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she heard it again, a faint scratching sound, coming from the window. The scratching sound returned. Claire woke to it, just as she had every night since the first time she heard it. But this time, it was louder, persistent, as if something or someone was deliberately trying to draw her attention. She bolted upright in bed, heart racing. It was almost as though the sound was coming from right outside her window. She pressed her ear against the cool glass, her breath fogging it in the cold air. But the window remained silent. Still, the sense of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, hung in the air like a thick fog. Claire couldn't explain it. The logical part of her mind tried to dismiss it, but the deep, nagging feeling in her chest told her something was terribly wrong. She got up, trembling slightly, and made her way to the window. Her fingers hesitated as they hovered over the latch, the cold of the metal seeping into her fingertips. She pushed the window open just enough to peer into the night. The wind was still, the trees barely moving. Nothing was there. She exhaled in frustration, looking around the yard. Nothing. Yet, her heart pounded as if something was just waiting in the shadows. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, but when she turned to close the window, she saw it again. The shadow. It was faint, barely visible in the corner of the yard near the trees, but there it was, standing motionless. A tall figure. Too tall to be human. Her breath hitched. She couldn't be sure, but she felt it, the same cold presence that had filled her room the first time she saw it. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It simply watched her. Claire stepped back, closing the window with a rush of panic. She locked it and backed away, her pulse quickening. She needed to confront this. She couldn't keep ignoring it, pretending nothing was happening. She had to know what, or who, was outside. The next day, Claire called a locksmith. She knew the house well enough now to realize there was only one way to prove she wasn't imagining things. She needed to see the footage from the cameras. When she moved in, she'd installed security cameras around the house, just for her own peace of mind. She'd never actually expected to need them, but now, as the days went by, she realized they might be her only source of truth. She sat down in front of her laptop, heart heavy with dread. She pulled up the footage from the previous night and began scrolling through it, fast-forwarding to the point she'd seen the shadow by the window. She held her breath, waiting. There it was. The shadow appeared, just as it had in her mind's eye. She watched, frozen, as the figure lingered in the yard. But it wasn't just standing there. As the footage played, Claire saw it move, slowly, deliberately, walking across the yard, heading toward the house. She could see its outline against the dim light of the moon, its long limbs unnaturally stiff as it glided toward the window. Her stomach twisted in disbelief. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't her imagination running wild. The figure was real. But as the camera zoomed in, Claire felt a strange, jarring recognition hit her. The figure, though obscured by shadows, had a familiar gait. The shoulders, the way it moved, the height, it was too familiar. It wasn't just any ghost, it was someone she knew. Her ex-husband, Jason. He had been tall, just like that. He had the same broad shoulders, the same long, deliberate stride. Claire's hand shook as she paused the footage. It couldn't be him. Jason had been living in another state for years, and he could never come here. But there was no denying the undeniable resemblance. It had to be a trick of the camera. She needed to see more. Her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Waller, her neighbor. "Claire, dear, I don't want to alarm you, but I thought you should know something." Claire's chest tightened. "What's wrong?" Mrs. Waller hesitated for a moment. "It's about the house. People say strange things happen there, but I never told you that. I thought I was just imagining things. But I think you should know. Someone else lived there before you." "I know," Claire replied, her voice unsteady. "David Turner. I found the article about him." Mrs. Waller's voice faltered, and Claire could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "That's not all. He wasn't the only one. There was a man before him. A man who disappeared long ago. It was a long time ago, but they say he never left." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Who was it?" "Jason. Your ex-husband," Mrs. Waller said, the words tumbling out before she could stop herself. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Her throat went dry. "What are you talking about? You didn't know? Jason, he was the one before David. They say he never left. He came back. He came back to the house after he left you. But no one ever saw him again. He vanished just like David did." The phone dropped from Claire's hand, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. She didn't pick it up. The world around her felt like it was spinning, her mind racing with the implications of Mrs. Waller's words. Could it be true? Was he the one haunting her house? Her breath came in shallow gasps as she replayed the footage in her mind. Could it be him, after all these years? That night, Claire decided to confront the figure. She couldn't take it any longer. She had to know what was happening to her, to this house. With a flashlight in hand, she stepped outside, her feet crunching in the dry leaves as she moved toward the yard. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees in a haunting chorus. She reached the spot where the figure had been standing the night before. The shadows were deep here, cast by the towering trees that surrounded her property. But she saw nothing. Then, a cold gust of wind swept through the trees, and Claire heard it, soft footsteps behind her, almost silent, but unmistakable. Slowly, she turned around. The figure stood in front of her. Tall. Familiar. Jason. His eyes, hollow and dark, stared at her with an expression she couldn't place. His body was gaunt, thinner than she remembered. His clothes hung off his frame, tattered and worn. What do you want from me? Claire whispered, her voice cracking. Jason didn't answer. He simply stepped closer, his long strides deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. The flashlight flickered in Claire's trembling hands. She backed away, unable to tear her eyes from his hollow gaze. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, Jason was gone. Vanished into the shadows, leaving Claire alone in the yard, her heart pounding in her chest. The next morning, Claire felt as if she were drowning in a haze of disbelief. Her mind spun with the encounter in the yard, her ex-husband, Jason, standing in front of her. She had always imagined the worst, ghosts, shadows, things that couldn't be explained. But now, she was questioning her own sanity. Was it really him? Was he back? The very thought of it sent chills down her spine. She hadn't slept a wink, and the exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Still, she knew she couldn't let this go. She had to find answers. She couldn't keep running from the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. Claire sat at her kitchen table, her fingers brushing over the old photographs that lined the counter. Pictures of her and Jason from years ago, when everything had been normal, or at least seemed normal. She stopped at one of the two of them standing together in the same yard where she had seen him last night. His face was smiling, full of life. But there was no life in his eyes now. She couldn't avoid the inevitable anymore. With a shaky breath, Claire grabbed her phone and dialed Mrs. Waller's number again. Her mind raced with questions, but all that came out was a weak, "I need to know more about Jason." Mrs. Waller's voice cracked when she answered. "I knew you'd call. I was hoping you wouldn't. I didn't want to tell you, but you need to hear it, Claire. He came back, before you even moved in. He came back to that house, just like I said. He wasn't himself anymore, not after." "Not after what?" Claire pressed, her stomach nodding. Mrs. Waller sighed deeply, the kind of sound that carried years of grief. "Not after the accident. Jason wasn't the same after that night. The night he left you, the night he drove off and disappeared for days. When he came back, people said he was changed. He didn't talk about it, but something happened to him, Claire. Something happened to that man." Claire's chest tightened. She had never known the details of what had really happened that night. Jason had left abruptly, and when he came back, he was different, cold, distant, but never explaining why. But the idea that something had changed him? That sent a new wave of fear through her. "Where is he now?" Claire whispered, though she was afraid of the answer. Mrs. Waller hesitated before responding, her voice barely a murmur. "No one knows. He never left. Not really." That evening, Claire gathered what little courage she had left and decided to visit the town's old records office. There had to be something more, something concrete that could explain what she was facing. Mrs. Waller's words haunted her, but now she needed facts. The building smelled of aged paper and dust, its dim hallways echoing with the footsteps of the occasional passerby. Claire approached the desk, where an elderly man sat, glasses perched on the tip of his nose, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the keyboard. "I'm looking for records on a man named Jason Montgomery," Claire began, her voice steadier than she felt. "He lived in this area years ago." The man glanced up over his glasses. "Jason Montgomery? You're not the first to ask about him. His case is one of the strangest ones we've had." Her pulse quickened. "What happened to him?" The old man leaned back in his chair, scratching his chin. "Well, he disappeared. But not like you think. No, he came back to the town, right after that car accident he was in. People say he wasn't the same afterward. He just showed up one day. Not a word about where he'd been. But something in his eyes? Like he wasn't really there, like he was still stuck in another place. And the house where he stayed, he kept it locked up. Wouldn't let anyone in." Claire's breath caught.
Where did he go after that?
The man paused, a strange look crossing his face.
That's the thing. People thought he was just gone. But I've heard things. They say that house wasn't empty, not really. And those who tried to go inside, they say they saw him there, standing in the windows, just watching.
That night, Claire could no longer deny the truth. Jason had never left. Whatever had happened to him, whether it was the accident or something more, had left a mark on him, and now it was haunting her. The house wasn't just a home. It was a prison, a place where the past refused to stay buried. Claire sat by the window, staring into the darkness outside. The trees swayed in the wind, but everything felt too quiet, too still. She was no longer just a tenant in this house. She was part of its history now. A history of disappearances and unexplained returnings. As the hours passed, she grew restless. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made her heart race. She couldn't stay in that room anymore. She had to know. She had to confront him. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the trees. Claire stepped into the yard, the flashlight trembling in her hands. The moonlight cast long shadows across the ground, distorting everything it touched. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise again. The cold air wrapped around her like an unwelcome embrace. She moved slowly, deliberately, toward the spot where she had seen Jason the night before. The trees loomed taller here, the darkness thickening the farther she ventured. She had no idea what she expected to find, but her feet moved as if guided by something more than fear. Suddenly, the silence was broken. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoed behind her. Claire froze.
Jason?
Her voice barely broke through the air. The footsteps stopped. And then, from behind her, a whisper.
You shouldn't have come.
Claire spun around, her flashlight shaking wildly. There, standing at the edge of the trees, was Jason. But this time, he wasn't the man she remembered. His eyes were sunken, hollow. His skin pale and tight, stretched over bone. The figure in front of her was a ghost of what he once was, something else entirely.
You left me,
he murmured, his voice low and distant, as if it came from somewhere far beyond this world.
You left me here, Claire. Now, I can never leave.
Claire took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. Her body screamed to run, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from him.
Why?
She whispered, her voice breaking.
Why are you doing this?
Jason took a slow step forward.
Because you can't escape the past. No one can. Not me, not you.
The air grew colder, the shadows around them deepening, thickening. The light from Claire's flashlight flickered and dimmed, as if the very energy around them was draining away.
I'm sorry,
Jason said softly, the words carrying an unsettling finality.
I'm sorry you have to see me like this.
Then, without another word, he faded into the shadows. Gone, just like that. Claire stood in the yard, her body trembling as the wind howled around her. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it all. But she knew better now. Jason was here, and he was never going to leave. Claire didn't know how much time passed after Jason disappeared into the trees. Minutes, hours, nothing felt real anymore. Her body ached from the cold, her mind from the weight of the discovery. She could still hear his voice echoing in her mind, that chilling whisper that seemed to come from somewhere deep and distant.
You can't escape the past,
he had said. But she had to try. She had to get out of this house. Whatever curse had been placed on it, whatever ghost was tied to it, Claire could feel it wrapping around her, tightening like a vice. She couldn't stay here, not with the growing sense that the house itself was alive, breathing, waiting. She stumbled back inside, locking the door behind her as if the mere act would shield her from whatever she had just encountered. She glanced around the room, half expecting Jason to appear in the corner, his hollow eyes watching her from the shadows. But there was only silence. That silence, however, was worse than anything. It pressed in on her, suffocating her. The house wasn't empty. It never had been. Jason was still here somewhere. She felt his presence in every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the window. The house was his prison. And now, it was hers too. Claire needed answers. She had to understand what had happened to him, what had happened to them. She needed to know the truth. She pulled out the stack of old newspapers she had gathered from the town records office. There had to be something she missed. She flipped through them, scanning for any mention of Jason or the strange occurrences in the house. Her eyes landed on a headline that made her blood run cold. Local man disappears after tragic car accident. Town left searching for answers. She read quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. The article was brief, but it held the key. Jason had been involved in a terrible car accident late one night. His car had crashed into a tree, and for days, no one knew if he was alive or dead. When he finally returned to town, his injuries were minimal, just a few bruises and scratches. But his behavior had changed. He became withdrawn, detached, and distant, as if something inside him had been shattered and never put back together. The article mentioned that he had started staying in the old house on the outskirts of town, the same house Claire now lived in. And after that, there were no more reports. No explanations. Just silence. But it wasn't just the accident. There was something else, something darker. Claire put the newspaper down, her mind racing. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Jason had returned, but he wasn't the same. The article had mentioned his odd behavior, but it hadn't explained why he went to that house, why he shut himself off from the world. She ran a hand through her hair, frustration building inside her. What had happened to him in that car? Had it been the accident, or was there something more? Was it possible that whatever Jason had encountered during the crash, whatever had changed him, was still here with her, lingering in the shadows? She had to go back. She had to confront the house, face whatever had been haunting him, and figure out why it had followed her here. That night, Claire grabbed the flashlight again, more determined than ever. This time, she wouldn't run. She couldn't. She stepped outside, the familiar chill of the night air wrapping around her like a shroud. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches swaying above her. The house loomed in front of her like a dark sentinel, its windows empty, waiting. But as Claire approached the front door, she saw something different. Something that made her heart leap into her throat. The door was ajar. A single crack, as if someone had left it slightly open. Jason? Had he been here? She hesitated for only a moment before pushing the door open, the creaking of the old wood sounding louder than it ever had before. She stepped into the hallway, her flashlight beam flickering in the darkness. The house seemed colder than before. It felt wrong. She moved down the hallway, her every step echoing through the silence. The house was still, but it wasn't empty. The air was thick with something that didn't belong. Then, as she passed by the stairs, she heard it. A soft sound, almost like a whisper. A name. Claire. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze, her mind reeling. She wasn't alone. Jason was here. She turned, the beam of her flashlight sweeping across the living room, and there he was, standing by the window, just like the first time. "Jason?" she called out, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring out the window, his back to her. Claire stepped closer, her heart hammering in her chest. This time, she could see him clearly. He looked thinner than before, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His clothes were torn, as if he had been living in the house for years, lost to time. "Jason," Claire repeated, this time louder, desperate.
What happened to you? Why are you doing this?
He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. They were hollow, black holes where life used to be.
You left me,
he whispered, his voice barely audible.
You left me here to die.
Claire's heart twisted in her chest.
I didn't leave you,
she choked out.
I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what you were going through. Please, Jason, you have to tell me what happened. What did you see? What changed?
Jason's gaze grew even colder, and he took a step forward.
You left me to die, Claire. And now, you'll never leave this place.
The room seemed to close in around her. The walls felt like they were breathing, shifting in the shadows. The temperature dropped, and Claire could see her breath in the air. The whispering started again, low and unintelligible, growing louder with each passing second. She backed away, her legs shaking.
Please,
she begged, her voice cracking.
Please, I need to know the truth. What happened to you?
Jason's lips curled into a twisted smile.
You want to know the truth?
He asked, his voice a hollow mockery of what it used to be.
You want to know why I'm here?
He stepped closer, the air thickening with each movement he made.
The truth is, you'll never escape. You'll never leave this place. Because the house holds us all.
Claire's stomach churned. The truth was something far worse than she could have imagined. Jason wasn't just trapped in the house. The house itself was alive, feeding on them. It had trapped him, and now it was trapping her too. Suddenly, the floor beneath her seemed to give way. She stumbled backward, but there was no ground, no safety. Just the void, the darkness closing in. And as she fell, Jason's voice echoed around her.
You can't leave. Not now. Not ever.